In progress.
So welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us so late on a Thursday afternoon, particularly ahead of a long weekend. It's good to see you here, but I'm not surprised there's so many of you here today because we have a great speaker with us today, Mr. Gert Jan Koopman, Director-General of DG NEAR, who is going to be unpacking the recently launched Enlargement Package 2024 edition. Today we're doing this as a co-moderation because enlargement at the EPC is split between two programs. My program, which is Europe in the World, which covers the Eastern Trio and Türkiye, and then Berta's program that covers the Western Balkans. So it's very nice to do such cross-program work. But without further ado, I want to give the floor immediately to you, Mr. Koopman, so you can start unpacking for us and sharing the results, the challenges, and the great results that are in this year's document. Thank you.
López, that is very encouraging indeed. No worries. I'm sure the colleagues in the room could hear what I had to say, and given that it was a bit flippant, maybe it's not a bad thing that it wasn't recorded. So let me refer to, as you said, Amanda, unpacking the package with a few points. I will run through the country, so don't worry, I will do that. But I want to make a few general points about the package first, which is that it is actually probably one of the most exciting packages we've seen in a long time. I know that when introducing it, some observers say that there's not so much by way of exciting new announcements in this package. But what this package really does is show the real momentum around enlargement, not just in terms of big announcements, but in terms of actual progress on the ground. And I think pretty much across the full range of our 10 candidate countries. And that is very encouraging. So I'm going to talk a bit more about this, but last year, of course, we had big announcements. This year, what we see is actually that these big announcements are translating into real action. And that's important because obviously enlargement is not just about big announcements. The geostrategic and political nature of enlargement requires things to change. And that is a bit what we see in this report. Let me illustrate this. We've seen a lot of action in the Western Balkans with cluster openings in Albania, where we opened the fundamentals cluster. As you know, this is the door opener for the accession talks. We opened accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova at an IGC in June. Last year, we were here announcing that we proposed the opening of the negotiations. Now it's not just happened, but actually we are on the way with the screening process, and we are working towards opening the fundamentals cluster under the Polish presidency. Back to the Western Balkans, we've seen that the European Council, upon a recommendation by the Commission, decided to open accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. And what is really quite exciting is that with Montenegro, we have closed. I'm going to ask you for your understanding the EBAs, the interim benchmarks, which, to put it in simple terms, are the door opener for the final phase of the negotiations. So that actually is really important. And there are two elements which may look technical, but which I think give very concrete substance to this momentum in two countries that are quite advanced along the trajectory, which is Montenegro, that has now formulated itself a target for closing all of the chapters by the end of 26, 2 years from now, essentially. And as I said, the door opener after the IGC in June makes this possible. We have a very detailed planning with the colleagues in Montenegro that actually gets us there by the end of the year. Don't get me wrong, we're not talking about the date for enlargement. That's a decision, obviously, for the political level. But what the country has said is that it wants to be ready. It wants to be EU ready by the end of 26. And I think, whilst that is, of course, very ambitious, it is also realistic if they keep up the momentum. Albania has made a similar statement. There, of course, the date is a little bit further down the line. And in fact, we're looking at the end of 27. But that's only 3 years away for a country where not so long ago we opened the fundamentals cluster. So when I talk about momentum, I'm actually talking about something very real, very tangible. I think that's very, very important indeed. Similarly, just to recall, last year, together with the enlargement package, we proposed the growth plan for the Western Balkans. This year, today, we have actually not just seen the legislation adopted by Council and Parliament in record time, but actually because we worked in parallel with the countries, we've seen 5 of the reform agendas being adopted by the Commission after an agreement by the Council. And I'm confident that we will still make the first payments under this new instrument, hopefully next month, by the latest before the end of the year. So within a year's time, from what was an idea, an ambitious, bold idea, to actual implementation. And I seriously advise everyone in the room to read these reform agendas, because the reform agendas are of a quality which I think surpasses that of many of our member states' next generation EU recovery and resilience plans. Now, of course, the starting points are different. There's much more work to do in candidate countries. So, I want to give that to our member states, but the reforms in fields like energy, in terms of competition policy, all of these very fundamental reforms that will shape the structure of their economies and societies, many of these reforms are very bold and are specified. And as you know, payments under the growth plan are going to be linked to actual fulfillment of the targets. So this hard conditionality that I was talking about last year is there. The countries have made bold commitments, and I'm confident that they will hit these targets and therefore be paid, which of course then feeds back into the accession process, because many of these reforms are reforms they need to do for accession. So that also is a tremendous, I think, achievement for which they need to be given credit. Similarly, as you will recall from the growth plan, the internal market, common regional market dimension, very, very important, has also taken off. There's been a breakthrough on the common regional market in the Western Balkans. For those of you who follow it, you know that this was blocked to some extent because there was a long-standing problem over the secretariat of the CEFTA. That's been removed. Many very important agreements have now entered into force, were decided in Berlin just a few weeks ago. And that then helps the countries also on their trajectory towards the internal market, because one of the fundamental tenets of the growth plan is that as the countries integrate regionally, they will be helped to integrate into the internal market. I think last year I was talking about the single euro payment area, which has the potential of saving 500 million euros in costs for these countries. You know that transferring money, if you're not in the single euro payment area, is extremely expensive, can add 10 to 30% to the costs of a single transfer. Now, after I think another sprint by many of them, 2 of these countries are essentially, I think, more or less ready. And the Payments Council, the European Payments Council that takes these decisions, will have a meeting in November next month. And I'm confident that both Montenegro and Albania will have a very good shot. Let me be a little bit careful. I don't want to step in the shoes of the EPC. A very good shot at getting into the SEPA. We set a target. I still remember setting this with the leaders back in February of this year for the 1st of January, and many people told me this was impossible. So we may actually have 2 not entering on the 1st of January, but in November. The others are now also sprinting to get on board. This is also transformational. I think it's as big as visa-free. By the way, Kosovo got visa-free on the 1st of January of this year as well. So I'm talking about a lot of material changes that are transformational in nature, that add a lot of impetus to the accession process. that are therefore really very important. And therefore, when we say that there is real momentum, there really is real momentum. Now, I had been given 15 minutes, and I'm not going to give you a boring rundown of all of the countries, but still, I want to pick up on a number of the important features that we have brought up in the reports. You will have seen the reports as usual. They contain a lot of substantive detail. They were praised by our member states last year for their rigor and their objectivity, and I think they indeed benefit from the same quality this year. Now, in the Western Balkans, I've already said a lot. I should mention that as far as Serbia is concerned, if we look through the fog that surrounds a lot of what is happening in this country, the country itself has decided this month that it wants to be done with the acquis alignment by the end of 27. It's really not a small thing for a country like Serbia to decide. And actually, they were quite silent about it. I only noticed it earlier this week when we were preparing for a series of meetings. So that is important. The issue there, of course, is CFSP alignment. CFSP alignment, generally speaking, is another success story. In Serbia, the pace of progress has been quite limited. But if I look at other reforms, they are now at a juncture where progress is really possible. And we really want to see Cluster 3 opened this year. It's been ready for a while, and that is essential. Naturally, that also means that on the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, they need to continue to deliver. We've made that an anchor also in the growth plan. We have cut the link between the two countries, and we've made the conditionality between the Commission and the country, the partner concerned. So that is very encouraging. I've already talked about Montenegro and Albania a lot. I won't repeat that. North Macedonia, we have a new government. It campaigned on not aligning with the agreements that the government entered into with regards to changing the constitution. But I sense that there is a bit of a reflection process ongoing in Skopje, and I hope that the country will come on board. It has, by the way, an excellent growth plan, which was largely prepared also with the previous government, showing that continuity is possible also in the Western Balkans. Bosnia and Herzegovina, we saw a lot of good progress until March. That's why we proposed that negotiations should open. It has slowed down since, given also the elections, local elections that took place earlier this month. So we really hope that the one country whose reform agenda hasn't been agreed yet can get back on track, and that we also manage to ensure that the steps that are needed for the Council to adopt the negotiating framework will be taken soon. I've mentioned Kosovo, despite good progress on many fronts, and I would say a stellar economic growth rate, the highest, I think, in the region. It is still waiting for the Council to invite us to assess their membership application. We stand ready to prepare an opinion, obviously, but unfortunately, there's also been a little bit of turbulence in terms of tensions in the north of the country, and this will need to be addressed. Now, I want to zoom in a little bit on Türkiye, where obviously, you know, from a legal point of view, the accession negotiations are where they are, but last year, we made the proposal to strengthen our cooperation in areas where there is mutual interest, quite significant areas. And I must say that after a slow start, admittedly, we have started working together in a number of areas. And here I do see some real progress being made, being achieved in these discussions, which I really hope will continue. We will resume discussions in Brussels very shortly, and I expect that that indeed will help us align our cooperation more fully on joint interests. Very important given the strategic nature of Türkiye. I turn now to the east because I wanted to leave the hardest situations for the last bit of my presentation. And I'm going to start with Ukraine, where, you know, we took the historic decision to open the negotiations at an IGC in June of last year. huge progress was achieved in extremely difficult circumstances. We all know that that was not an easy decision for the European, for the Council to take. Decision was taken, and now the reform momentum is continuing despite the a very difficult situation in the country with the war raging and not looking all too encouraging right now. We see a lot of progress and know what the opening benchmarks are that the country needs to hit in order to be able to open the fundamentals cluster. And I expect that with hard work that is now ongoing, we should be in a position to do so under the Polish presidency, hopefully in the first half of the Polish presidency rather than the second half. But of course, that depends on the pace of progress. So we enter a phase with Ukraine where we need to open the clusters. That means a lot of work. The country is in a very difficult situation, but is continuing a very high pace of reforms for which they should be commended. At the same time, of course, I want to mention reconstruction, want to mention the economic support for the country, where our Ukraine plan started delivering last year. It's been delivering actually since the summer, and that feels like a very long time ago, but it's a significant achievement. On top of that, the ERA loans were approved just last week in Washington, adding another $50 billion to the financing over the period until 27. So that gives a little bit of an economic anchor, a financial anchor for the next years, and we will certainly work very closely with the country. Moldova, same very determined progress achieved, opening of the negotiations in June, targeting the opening of the fundamentals cluster in the beginning of next year. Here, of course, what we see, and I have to weigh my words carefully, is a very difficult landscape with massive intervention by a third country, by Russia, in domestic politics, leading to a very bumpy referendum with allegations concerning up to 300,000 votes being bought by Russian intermediaries, as a result of which the outcome of the referendum was very close, 50.4%, but nevertheless, the constitution will be changed. And I just learned a minute ago, literally, from the Moldovan government that the election commission has agreed with the result, has endorsed the result, finalized the result of the referendum, and therefore the constitution will now be changed very shortly. Elections on Sunday in the second round will determine the outcome for the presidential choice of the country going forward. So again, here, very sustained reform momentum across a wide range of important fields, notably justice reform, filling top positions in the judicial and prosecution services, the fight against anti-corruption, and the establishment of a track record remaining important elements to move forward. We also tabled earlier this month a growth plan for Moldova, very much inspired of what we have done for the Western Balkans. Very encouraged by the very rapid pace in the Council to take this forward. I would like to see it enacted early next year. And I think if the Council continues to work like this, that should be possible. I hope the Parliament will soon appoint a rapporteur to facilitate that. It would be essential, I think, in a situation where economically speaking, Moldovans have not yet seen the benefits of the EU path. In fact, being so close to the war in Ukraine, they've been suffering quite a bit. So this growth plan is of vital importance to demonstrate that the EU path actually is accompanied with real economic progress. This brings me to the last candidate country in the East, Georgia, which, as you know, after the granting of the candidate status in December 2023, let me not mince my word, lost its way, adopted laws that really run counter to the EU path, notably the Foreign Agents Law, but also the law on family values and the protection of minors, which in essence was an anti-LGBTIQ law, as a result of which the European Council essentially paused the accession negotiations. Very little progress was made on the 9 steps that had been defined. In fact, there was backsliding on 4 of them. So that was not very good. And we have just seen in the elections taking place last week that there were significant problems in terms of the integrity of the election system, which we have clearly highlighted as requiring an in-depth investigation. As our President von der Leyen said, the citizens of Georgia deserve to know what happened last weekend. So a deep investigation is absolutely necessary. Of course, here we have the people of Georgia, 90% pro-European, and it would be a terrible tragedy if the country's government didn't align with what the people very clearly want, which is the European path. And the European path is not built on the type of legislation that was adopted earlier this year. It's built on European values, and we hope the country will revert to that soonest. So in conclusion, it's been an extremely busy year. There's a lot of momentum in most countries heading in the right direction. And I think that if I can make a prediction, 2025 will be the year where the proof will really be in the pudding. If this momentum is sustained, and we will be sitting here again in October 2025, if the Montenegrins really manage, and the Albanians and the Serbians, we would be looking for the first time in more than 15 years. Oh, sorry, what am I saying? I'm exaggerating, as I always do. In more than 10 years, we would be looking at the realistic prospects of new members joining soon. I hope that by then our work with Türkiye will be bearing fruit, that the intensity of the work together will have picked up very significantly. And I do hope that with the countries in the East, we will have opened many chapters, many clusters indeed, all of which would bring this prospect of accession much closer. So with that, I would like to pause. I apologize for having been a bit long, but it's been a very rich year indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to the EPC. Is the mic working? I think so, yeah. On a Thursday evening that indeed feels like a Friday, and for your comprehensive presentation of the enlargement package, for taking stock of the progress made in the past year, and also for sharing your optimism, which yeah, it's great to hear. I agree with you that next year is going to be a really crucial year, not only because of we might see substantial progress, but also because of the MFF negotiations that will start. We'll also see the pre-enlargement policy reviews being presented. That I think that both these debates will really determine the future of the policy. I will kick off the Q&A. Going back to what you mentioned about the internal deadlines, we know that the Commission and the EU in general has been quite reluctant to set deadlines for candidates, but as you said, the Commission has welcomed and appreciated the fact that candidates have set deadlines for themselves, and you have assessed them as being realistic. My question now is okay, if Montenegro is to be ready by 2026 and Albania by 2027, and the Commission thinks this is realistic, then it means that member states should be ready to greenlight, to open the doors to new members by the end of the decade, by the end of the current or the upcoming, the incoming political institutional cycle. Do you think that this is realistic? What is the Commission going to do to make sure that there is consensus among the 27 to deliver when candidates deliver? And do you think that this puts pressure on the member states, but also EU institutions in general, to seriously tackle the issue of EU internal reform, given the fact that both enlargement and reform have been clearly linked by von der Leyen in 2023, but also in Granada by member states, and then in the political guidelines presented in July?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Indeed, this means that we are now entering a phase that we haven't seen for over a decade. It's for real now. If they continue to deliver, of course, it remains strictly a merit-based process. But I think a few points are very important here. One is that the Commission has decided, as you know, to appoint a dedicated commissioner for enlargement, showing that, you know, the enlargement process really is a top priority. The president repeats that whenever she has an opportunity to do so. So there is going to be more political firepower brought to bear. Secondly, the preparatory work is also being undertaken on the inside. And I would refer to the mission letters, not just of Commissioner Designate Kos, responsible for enlargement, but also of all the other commissioners, which make a very important point about communication. Because let me be very bold, I think at this juncture, there isn't any guarantee at all that the populations in our member states would support enlargement. I don't think in some countries that would be feasible right now. And this means that we need a very sustained debate and communication effort in the EU with our member states, with citizens, companies, civil society, trade unions, employers associations. We need to really have an honest, open, and intensive debate. And this is recognized in the guidelines. For me, actually, it is probably one of the top priorities. The accession work with the countries is very hard. The countries have to do most of the work. We need to accompany it. But we have a big responsibility internally. So that is important. It's also institutional work that needs to take place. You refer to the policy reviews. They're also being taken forward, as you see. I think what is clear for me is that you know, potentially seeing the union enlarged at the end of the next institutional cycle would indeed be a major breakthrough for the policy. The question is whether it really requires all of the reforms to be in place that we're going to be looking at. It's premature to answer that question, but I would respectfully point to the size of the economies we're looking at, and I would also refer to the fact that the accession treaties, of course, can provide accompanying measures that facilitate entry into the EU. So I personally do not really believe that without deep internal reforms and treaty change, as some people argue, accession to the EU is impossible. Clearly, the two will go in parallel. That's important. There's added motivation for internal reforms that are needed in any event, but we need also to be realistic about the type of enlargement that we're talking about, potentially in the shorter run. Of course, in the longer run, there will be others who will come, and that will, of course, affect the nature of the requirements. Thank you.
I would also have a question before we go to the floor. I hope the microphone's working. Negotiating frameworks provide for accelerated or phasing into individual EU policies already during the negotiating process before they actually become a member. So based on Ukraine's already existing level of readiness, what sectors do you see as potentially an option for Ukraine to actually get itself into? I mean, what's on the table at the moment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Ukraine, of course, benefits from a DCFTA, a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, which even makes this process of gradual integration possible to an extent that in the Western Balkans is not yet entirely possible. So the potential is significant. Right at the start of the war, the energy systems were synchronized. So energy clearly is an area where, for a variety of reasons, including strategic security reasons, there is a potential. I would also mention transport as an area where, for obvious reasons, the potential is present. And then if you look at, sorry to come back to our growth plans and what the Ukraine plan and the Western Balkans growth plan set out, then you see a menu that is quite rich of areas where integration could take place, including the digital space, where the war conditions are probably less relevant than in some other areas. So this is clearly an area where we will put a lot of emphasis going forward.
So there are already questions. Maybe we can pass the mic. And before asking the question, if you can present yourself.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. I'm Lily from Reuters. I had a question about Georgia. You mentioned how the population of Georgia is overwhelmingly pro-European, but of course, the process is de facto halted for the country at the moment. So I was wondering what ideas you have or what the options on the table are for maintaining a relationship with the people of Georgia, keeping them motivated about the European path while kind of the relationship of the government remains frozen, how you balance that. Thank you.
There is someone else wanting to ask a question. Yeah. Or... I have a problem with my voice, so apologies for that. Christina Kahl from Trade Up. My question is, I think I would like to follow up on the issue on the communication internally with the EU population. Looking at, we've decided on Ukraine following the ATM decision in June to start Article 29 negotiations on further trade liberalization, in particular in agriculture. And when I look at the stakeholder consultation of the EU stakeholders, a lot of negative voices who say, no further trade liberalization. So I would like to have your view, because I think that's a good example where it shows that we have a communication issue really when we talk about this type of negotiations. So I would like kind of what you see, what are the prospects of these negotiations under the circumstances?
So maybe Georgia first. Hi, Lily. Yes, no, I think I don't want to speculate too much because I want to see what comes out of the investigation of the elections first, and then there's a lot there are a lot of scenarios that could open up. Huh? So we're not at a stage where we know for sure that we're going to be dealing with a government that is choosing this path, and therefore the scenario you describe is a possible scenario, but it's only one of the scenarios. Now, you may want to look at what we have done with our financial support for the country, which we have pivoted away from budget support towards support for CSOs. So we do need to maintain that relationship. And we do need to continue to work closely with everyone in the country who remains staunchly committed to the European path. I would also expect that over time, and I cannot speculate about how this would play out, but it's hard to imagine a country's government permanently moving away from the European path in a situation where 90% of the population wants the European path. So, there may be very challenging discussions to be had with a future government in Georgia, but the commitment to the people of Georgia remains very firm. On the communication question you raised, Ukraine negotiations on agriculture, you've picked, of course, the hardest sector. And let me make the following comment about gradual integration on the one hand and the ATMs and agricultural on the other hand. Of course, what we did at the start of the war for agriculture is not gradual integration. We need to be very clear about that. Gradual integration is a process where the full rule book is put on the statute books in the candidate country, and then on that basis, the candidate country starts participating to some extent in the internal market, right? That's gradual integration. What we did with the ATMs was essentially helping the country generate sufficient foreign revenues to sustain its economy as it was being attacked by Russia. So that's not the same. And I think this has also led to a slightly different perspective on gradual integration. So I want to clarify that point. Now, it's also true that there's a lot of myths about how agricultural products have swamped European markets. I don't want to elaborate this too much, but I think a lot of the concerns are frankly speaking a little bit misplaced, and it points to the need to have a genuine communication strategy that's based on facts, involving also people who have concerns, because the concerns that many stakeholders in the EU have are real. The Ukrainian agricultural sector is huge. Even in an unsubsidized format, it's been able to conquer very significant parts of world markets. So it's not surprising that some agricultural producers in the EU have some queries. But this requires, and it's a very good illustration of our point about the importance of communication. It really requires hard work on our side, and we haven't been able to do that yet. So that is why this new priority for the Commission, not just for the Commissioner for Enlargement, but for all commissioners, is so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Lars Olgard, formerly with the Commission, also now with Trade Up. Thank you, Gert Jan, for a very good overview of the enlargement process. Obviously, it's going to be extremely complicated, but I was a bit worried when you said the problem isn't very many who right now in the member states would actually be ready to have the enlargement. That's a bit of a worrying fact, but I think it's realistic right now. And we were talking about this situation with a lot of criticism about this and that. But I wanted to ask you a more general question, and that is that normally in an enlargement process, you try to compare the acquis with what the situation is in the candidate country. Now, talking about agriculture again, President von der Leyen has initiated the strategic dialogue, and she's given the commissioner, designated the commissioner, the task to come up with a reform, and probably a rather fundamental reform. How do you, in the candidate countries, and how do we handle a situation where the goalposts are moving all the time? Are we going to integrate them in the discussion on reform? How does that work? It's not just agriculture; it's a lot of others, but this is a particularly difficult one. Thank you.
Yeah, Serafine Dinkel, I'm from the Free University of Brussels, ULB. You mentioned the case of Serbia, and I was wondering, since the Commission President also at our trip to Serbia mentioned that there had been some impressive progress, especially also in the area of fundamentals. Reading the report, that isn't necessarily immediately clear which are these specific progress points, both for fundamentals and for the alignment with foreign policy. So I wanted to ask if you could give some examples for such successful reforms. Thank you.
My name is Mark, and I'm Shuma Training from the European Parliament. I have a question on Albania. So now that Albania hosts external processing of member state asylum seekers, so how will that protocol be taken into account in the negotiations, and how will that affect Albania's progress to align with EU asylum acquis? Thank you.
So maybe starting with the point about the moving goalposts. That's an interesting point, but it's also, to be fair, it's not an entirely new point, because I think people tend to forget that our policies have been evolving continuously. That's in the nature of EU policies, including, incidentally, the CAP. Now, of course, that makes it a bit harder when we talk accession for the candidate countries. And I think what that means is that dynamically an adjustment period needs to be granted to the candidate countries in those areas where policy evolution in the EU is significant. And in fact, transitional periods are as old as the enlargement strategy. So I think that is the way that this will be going. In any case, I would see transition periods for Ukrainian agriculture as an obvious issue that needs to be looked at, given the significance of the adjustment for both sides, actually, going forward. You mentioned Serbia. I think I'm sure that the concern is very much about Serbia's policy of balancing, and when we were in Serbia with the president, we had an illustration of this. But I would like to make an important point, which is that the president of Serbia did not attend the BRICS summit in Kazan. The United Nations Secretary-General did attend the summit in Kazan. And in fact, President Vučić met with 3 European leaders as Kazan was unfolding And I think that is maybe something to be aware of in these discussions. In terms of reforms, actually our report is quite balanced, because what we note is that, with the elections taking place relatively early in the year, the delays in forming the government, the reform pace has not been very impressive, and I think the report is very clear about that. Nevertheless, the electoral difficulties in the capital were noted, and the government has actually responded to the ODIHR recommendations and has promised to follow up on that. So in that sense, there is some progress also in Serbia, but more is needed. I think this year's report is very clear, very blunt about the importance of the CFSP and moving away from a situation where misinformation is a very prominent feature of debates. And when it comes to CFSP alignment, it actually mentions Russia very explicitly, and this is the case in the chapter on Serbia. So I think the report is balanced. There has been progress. Some of this progress is not, how should I say, so visible in legal terms, but if I can mention two examples that are very realistic and that are very important. One relates to Ukraine. Serbia provides more ammunition to Ukraine than any of our member states. And probably the Ukrainian army would be in an even worse situation without those ammunitions. I think that's just a reality. And secondly, the decision to grant the exploitation rights of the lithium mine to a Western consortium at a time when there was a joint Chinese-American alternative is also a very important choice. This is not a choice just for a few weeks, a few months, a few years. This is a strategic choice that actually really anchors the country in the EU. So there is a number of those type of developments which, they don't really fit into our enlargement methodology per se, but which nevertheless need to be taken into account. Turning to Albania and migration, I want to be very clear. This is a bilateral issue between Albania and Italy. Obviously, the full acquis, insofar as migration is concerned, will need to be taken over by Albania, and in that context, any issues that might arise from this particular example will be addressed. But per se, this is not an issue for accession policy. Thank you.
Now the question of the lady in red. I don't know if there's any mic.
Hello, my name is Katie Chumbadze. I'm Deputy Head of the Mission of Georgia. I would not have questions probably, but with your permission, I would like to elaborate 3 points probably from my side. First, on the report itself, and let me express the gratitude for the huge work that was done by the Commission and DG NER to have the solid assessments for each country and particularly for Georgia. Of course, that report described all the gravity of we as a country had throughout the last year. All those assessments are well noted and received, and still the report, as it is the merit-based assessment, of course, very well describes also the progress that Georgia has done throughout years in terms of democratic reforms. And so in terms of assessing level of preparation, we also took note of that good assessments. Right now, we are working to collect all the recommendations that were given by the report, all the assessments in terms of the work that needs to be done. And of course, there is very solid will and readiness to work on those recommendations and to follow on them, because this is a solid roadmap or for our homework for the next enlargement year. On the elections, as a diplomat, I would not allow myself to talk about the political points. Let me just provide a couple of quotes from the preliminary statement by preliminary findings and conclusions by the OSCE there that assessed the preparations for the elections as well administrated, and also the election day generally and procedurally well organized and administrated. Of course, we hear a lot of questions and information that are spread inside the country and outside of the country. And I think that there is quite solid goodwill and readiness also to look into that and investigate all the cases on which the observation missions have approached the Central Election Commission or the prosecution office, and there is the readiness to look into that. And the Central Election Commission has also randomly selected and calculated the results of several hundreds of polling stations. Last but not least, of course, about the trajectory of Georgia. As Director-General rightly mentioned, Georgia is the country with strong European identity, of course, and of course, there is absolutely no alternative for that country to move away from the European Union. And there is very, very strong European trajectory, and the country that has paid quite high price for its European choice in the face of Russia's ongoing occupation on several waves of ethnic cleansing and aggression. That country, of course, cannot move away from the European Union. We are facing currently a lot of turbulences throughout this year. As the election year, we had a lot of challenges, of course, but I'm sure that very, very soon we will see a lot of statements and concrete steps in terms of reassuring and recommitting to the path towards the European Union. Thank you.
I don't know if there's another question there.
And so they Dutch NOS radio and television. The if question is always awful, I know, but if this and if that. But since there is sort of a Trump task force in your commission, I think I can ask this question. It's irrelevant. Next week, the elections. I can imagine that you also have thought about, well, a possible win by Donald Trump. There are a lot of political friends on the Balkans, especially Dodik, Vučić, the guys in Skopje. Maybe Janša comes back in Slovenia, but he's already in the European Union. But I mean, Vučić, of course, especially. Have you thought about that? And is there a sort of a preparation? And have you ever thought the last couple of weeks about this great momentum you're talking about, that this momentum can also be endangered by a comeback of Trump?
On the lady from the Georgian mission, I don't think there was a question. There was an expression of the willingness of the country to stay on the European path, and I can only, of course, salute that. On what Tijn was just saying, I obviously cannot comment on our internal preparations, but what I do want to say is that in just about any scenario, whether Mr. Trump wins or Ms. Harris wins, that the momentum in American policy is one where I observe, I'm speaking in a personal capacity, a gradual shift of the center of focus over a longer time period towards the Indo-Pacific. That's the reality. So in either scenario, Europe will need to assume its own responsibilities more seriously. And I think accession to the EU is a very important element of a more assertive EU on the global stage. This cannot be something that is determined by elections several thousands of miles away, even if they might well have an impact on the EU. I think the world we live in is one that is arguably more challenging, more dangerous. The war in Ukraine shows this beyond any reasonable doubt, obviously, than we have seen in a long time. And this means that the EU itself will have to demonstrate its autonomy more forcefully vis-a-vis its most important partners. And our accession candidates are, of course, our most important partners because they want to be part of us. So I think that you know, the process of playing this more this more self-deterministic role on the world stage will simply have to continue, irrespective of the precise outcome of the US elections.
A couple of additional questions, if I may. You said that ties with Türkiye seem to be going quite well. What do you see as potential low-hanging fruit, if I can use that term, which can have really a tangible dynamic in relations? And my second question is about the extensive disinformation and hybrid warfare that the Kremlin has used both in Moldova and in Georgia, and it's not something new. I mean, it's been going on for years all over the place, also in the Western Balkans. I mean, how can the EU further reinforce its efforts to push back against this and further strengthen societal resilience? I mean, I know the EU has already done quite a lot, but we've seen that more needs to be done. I mean, it's not just an EU job, the US media platforms and whatnot. And attached to that, if I may, Transnistria, what can be done? How could it rejig the current approach towards Transnistria? I mean, is it potentially possible that Moldova can become part of the EU without a solution to the Transnistrian problem? I mean, not everybody in Transnistria actually voted for the Russian, I shouldn't say that, Russian, the sort of pro-Russian candidate, right? But what are the options there? I mean, is the EU thinking about new approaches? How can you change the format for the Transnistrian talks? I mean, Russia is obviously embedded there. What are the options on the table?
Thank you very much indeed. So on Türkiye first, I think first of all it's worth recalling that Türkiye is an enormously important trade partner, and we are a very important trade partner for Türkiye. We have a customs union. We've had a customs union for a very long time. It needs a little bit of maintenance, I would say, and I think this potential needs to be elaborated. So trade is very important. There are lots of obstacles that are there. The scope of our trade relationship is also not as extensive as it could be. So I'm talking strategically now, right? So in the longer term, this is an untapped potential with a candidate country in which we need to invest. Similarly, we have strategic interests in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we have strategic interests in the South Caucasus. And I hope that working with Türkiye as a partner, as a reliable partner, we can, from the perspective of mutual interests, move the cursor in these two arenas in a way that satisfies both. I think that's very important. The South Caucasus is very important. And in the Black Sea, we have exactly the Black Sea strategy is another other example of where we have the potential of working together more closely. A very practical point is that the EIB, since many years, has not been active in Türkiye. Following the horrible earthquake last year, they actually made a contribution. I think as part of our work with Türkiye, this is a low-hanging fruit. You asked for low-hanging fruits, and I talked about strategy, which is a bit evasive, but certainly this is something that could be done quickly. Obviously, there is the Cyprus question. We all know that needs to progress. But I see across the whole range of themes which have been identified, a lot of potential for both sides to work together in a much more constructive manner. And in fact, I think we have been working together in a much more constructive manner over the past months, and this needs to be sustained in the interest of the EU. Now, you talked about disinformation, and you refer to the fact that we do a lot, so I'm not going to list all of the things we already do. Let me just say that for me personally, what happened in Moldova is a wake-up call. I think we are playing in the second league of misinformation fighting, and what we see is that we need to move to the Premier League, and we better do that fast. And on Transnistria, yes, you're very insistent. So Transnistria, I would make the following point. And it's linked a little bit to progressive gradual integration and the growth plan. It is very interesting to see that business in Transnistria, which was in the past prior to the war very oriented towards the east and Russia, has been reorienting itself towards the west, towards EU markets. The potential of early integration in the internal market and the growth plan for, I'm just making the point for Moldova, is a massive plan in relation to the size of their economy, deliberately so. So this is more than 20% of the economy of Moldova. And we're talking very closely with the IMF to avoid this money leading to macroeconomic instability, because it's a huge injection. So it's a huge opportunity. This really could be a game changer. And I think for society in Transnistria, this is also a huge opportunity. It's a poor part of the country. Finally, the energy systems, where Transnistria plays a very important role in Moldova, are being rejigged as we integrate the energy system of the country more in the EU system. So I think all of that materially, economically, societally pulls the country closer to the EU. And I think that that provides the opportunity for a transition where, you know, the issue becomes much less challenging for the country as it integrates the EU. Now, then there are many scenarios possible to contemplate, but I think the problematic nature of this situation could be reduced dramatically by the policies that we're rolling out, and I think that should be the first priority.
Okay, it's almost time, but let's do a final round of questions. I saw you first, so I would, well, I see that Dan has already the mic, so Dan, then maybe, I mean, anyway, let's get all the questions and then we close it.
Thanks, Berta. Hi, this is Dan from the UK mission. I just had a quick question. Just looking to this time next year, are there any clear milestones you'd like to achieve between now and then?
My name is Marina Grazer. I'm just coming from Moldova and Georgia when I was observer at the both elections. And in Georgia, I was observer in Marneuli. I saw a very disturbing situation in the polling stations, and something what couldn't be. It was not. It was election. It was a joke, really. What we saw in Marneuli and Polnisi. Regarding Moldova, I have a question for you. If it's possible to apply the same solution as like for Cyprus for Moldova. And I was talking with many people in both countries, and I understood that the European Union is not so visible. So no common people, they don't know what EU does for them. For example, in Gagauzia, support for EU is even lower than in Transnistria. So I'm just asking, is there any way that we have a more visibility in both countries? Because I was talking with Azeri minority, Armenian minority also in this region in Marneuli and Bolnisi, and the people didn't know anything about EU. Thank you very much.
Hi, so my name is Katarina Živkovic, and I'm from the DG Expo of the European Parliament from the Enlargement Unit. So I had a question kind of more about the relation between the Commission, obviously, and the European Parliament, but related to everything we've been talking about. So kind of bearing in mind the importance of like preserving and strengthening, of course, the credibility of both these or all the European institutions as like non-partisan partners who work in the interest of citizens. What do you see as the European Parliament's role in engaging? And I specifically will mention Serbia here, for example. So what do you see as the Parliament's role in engaging with Serbia on issues of ensuring transparency, high standards, etc., by companies operating there? I'm specifically, for example, thinking about the contentious issues such as lithium mining. So what is, so to speak, the role of the European Parliament then in engaging?
Hello. Yes, good evening. So my name is Redan. So I'm an economist. I have teaching experiences in Balkan countries, also in Poland, Turkey, and Central Asia, teaching different economic subjects. So my question about the potential expansion of the European Monetary Union or European Banking Union or European Capital Market Union. So basically, some Western Balkan countries, their currency is already pegged into euro, and some countries, they adopt euro like Montenegro. However, so what do you think would the financial system in the EU, especially the progress of the European Banking Union and the European Capital Market Union, would be more risky or maybe less risky to adopt the new member states after the enlargement process, and what would be the mitigation strategies to to manage the risks? Thank you very much.
Would you mind? Because otherwise it gets it's going to be late. I will not stop myself from giving some answers to these questions, and we need to draw this to a close. So can I answer? Yeah. So benchmarks. I like benchmarks. It's a good old policy recipe. So basically, where do we want to be a year from now? Well, actually, if you look at our report, and I'm turning now to the Western Balkans, we have actually the recipe, the structure set out, which means that on the growth plan, the countries need to deliver on the reforms in their reform agendas. And it's very, very clear what they need to do. And this will massively bring them closer to the EU, and it will bring significant economic change. So this is going to be monitored very carefully. I want all of those reforms to be done. When it comes to Albania, if you look at the roadmap we have agreed with them, it means that all of the chapters need to have been opened. That's to be concrete. Moldova, let me stay in the Western Balkans for a second. Montenegro would have actually had to by this time next year, we would expect that a great number of preparatory work streams have been completed. We would be closing. I'm not going to reveal the number of chapters, but a significant number of chapters on the road to getting to the end of 26, when all of the chapters would need to be closed. So this is very precise. My hope would be that we have unblocked by then the situation in North Macedonia, which really should recouple with Albania. And I hope that we will have a breakthrough with Serbia, given its stated objective to align with the acquis by 2027. So I really hope that we will also be able to move forward. I hope that we will have had the opportunity to provide an opinion on Kosovo's membership application. I hope that some of these issues could move forward. And finally, on Bosnia, obviously we want the negotiations to be open, which means a lot of reforms in the country. So a very ambitious agenda. And maybe people think I'm blue-eyed when I say these things, but I actually think these things can be done. And we need to convince ourselves seriously that this is actually what needs to be done and what will be done if we are serious about enlargement. Because otherwise, enlargement goes back to where it was, with every respect for the Juncker Commission and the Juncker Commission, where we were pretending to enlarge and they were pretending to reform. This time is over. In the world we live in today, this is really over. That's why these very ambitious objectives could actually be realistic. I hope for Ukraine and Moldova, it might be a bit too much to open all of the clusters, but I hope we will open many of the clusters. And I think on the economics, this integration, progressive integration in the EU, will be absolutely fundamental for the sustainability of their societies. And finally, on Georgia, I hope the country comes back to the EU track. With Turkey, I've already given you an outlook of where I think we should be, and that is also quite an ambitious agenda. So now. Moving to moving to you. Were you the second or the third question? I might have second, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then pardon. So first of all, let me say I'm really worried about what you say about your role as election observer. I think it strengthens our view that these investigations of what happens need to be really genuine. And it's not recounting some votes that is going to do the trick. There needs to be a full and comprehensive assessment and investigation of these allegations. I think your point about the EU not being known, I mean, this is really very, very serious point. When I say that we need to play in the Premier League when it comes to communication, I also mean this, because it is not normal that in a candidate country we are not known in large parts of the country. And the problem here is the urban-rural divide, where I think in the urban elites or the urban dwellers, they know about the EU, but in the countryside we're not known, and this is not acceptable. We have to work harder, and the countries also have to work hard. It's not just for the EU Commission to do this. So we have an enormous amount of work to do on communication. It's not just pumping out the facts, distributing leaflets. We have to work with civil society organizations. We need a very different approach that is much deeper, much more granular, that is tied to people who actually matter in these communities if we are to progress. So that's a huge challenge on our to-do list. Pivoting to the European Parliament is not for me, with every respect, it's not for me to tell the European Parliament what its role is. I'll get into trouble with some of your colleagues if I try that. But let me make the following point. I think the European Parliament is a very important player because you represent the citizens of Europe through your elected members. There's many instruments that the European Parliament has, interparliamentary groups, for example, which can play a very important role. I think the Commission needs to work very closely with the Parliament. I'm sure that the Commissioner designate will say a word about that next week during your hearing. But without this deep collaboration with the EP and the outreach to the candidate countries together, enlargement is going to be hampered. So I see that as an important feature. And I think the nature of the discussions we have about the accession process, maybe we need to have a discussion about how we structure that, because it could be a bit more substantive. And I think that would help both sides. You see, I'm getting tired, so I lost the last. The monetary, yes, no, that's a very, very interesting question. Monetary union, and you talked about banking union and the risks, right? So let me say that we have had very extensive exchanges with the central bank governors of the Western Balkans, and this is extremely encouraging. They have independent central banks, and they have high quality governors, which is actually a real asset. Now, when it comes to protecting the financial systems in the EU, SEPA, Single Euro Payment Area, which I referred to earlier, is really essential, because it means that all of the relevant legislation that protects our financial systems needs to be on the statute books, and this is what they're committing to. So that is an essential anchor for integrating them into the EU, and because they want to be in SEPA already at the beginning of next year, that is a very good example also of progressive integration or gradual integration, which will allow us also to monitor how this functions in practice before actual membership. On the euro area and the monetary union more generally, two of these countries are euroized, and we will need to look at how that plays out. Euroized doesn't mean that they are ready to become a member of the euro area overnight. And in our logic, euro area membership comes oftentimes much later than membership. But we haven't had many cases of euroized countries being accession candidates and joining. So this is a whole new challenge for us, and we don't have too much time to work out what that looks like. My sense is that we cannot apply the same recipe we've applied in the past. We need a much deeper discussion also with the ECB, obviously, about this, and therefore that adds to the excitement of the enlargement process. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, an hour was clearly not enough to discuss 10 reports plus one communication, but as we said already in the beginning, it's Thursday that feels like Friday. It's almost dark in Brussels, so we are going to have to close it here. Thank you so much, Director-General Koopman, for coming here, for presenting the package. Thank you to all of you for joining us. The next month will surely be exciting as we went through like the different milestones of the past year and the upcoming ones, including closing chapters for Montenegro, opening the fundamentals for Ukraine and Moldova, hopefully Bosnia, agreeing on the reform agenda and getting a negotiating framework, and so on and so forth. And as we said, with the discussions on the next MFF starting and the upcoming pre-enlargement policy reviews. So much to pay attention to. We'll continue conversation. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.